Now let's move on to hint number 10. It says that if the game is not ended, ask the user if they want to draw another card. If yes, then use the deal card function to add another card to the user's card list. If no, then the game has again ended. Over here, in the if statement, we can add an else, because if the game hasn't ended, as in they haven't gone over 21 or nobody's got a blackjack, then we're going to ask the user if they want to get another card. I'm going to use a input, and I'm going to ask the user to type Y to get another card, otherwise type N to pass. And I'm going to save this input inside a variable, which I'll call user should deal. Now we can check to see if this variable is equal to Y. Well, in that case, we're going to add another card to the user's card list by doing the same thing that we did in the beginning, where we dealt 2 cards to each player, by saying user cards.append, and inside the parentheses, the thing that we want to append is the output from deal card. So just a quick check to make sure you've got all the parentheses there, and then we're ready to address the else. If they didn't type Y, then that means they don't want another card. Well, then in this case, the game has again ended. So we can say is game over equals true. Let's test this out as well. We got 7 and 11 with a current score of 18. If we type Y, hopefully we'll get another card. And we did see that prompt and we saw something happen, but our program then promptly ended. Let's take a look at the next step. How can we get our game to repeat itself? So hint number 11 tells us that the score will need to be rechecked with every new card drawn, and the checks in hint 9 need to be repeated until the game ends. Notice how we've got this flag, is game over, which is set to true whenever the game ends. It starts off being false, and what this means is we can actually create a while loop, which basically keeps on calculating the user's score and the computer score, makes all of these checks, which are in hint 9, and then repeats itself until the game ends. Let's go ahead and do that. After all the initial setup, we're going to create a while loop. And the while loop is going to be active until the game is over. So we can say while not is game over, then go ahead and carry out all of these instructions. So calculate the user score, calculate the computer score, check that nobody's gone over 21 and nobody's gotten a blackjack. And if the user wants more cards, then they should. If they don't, then the game is over. So let's run this and try it again. Our cards are 10 and 10, which probably means we shouldn't get another card because we're already so close to 21. But I'm going to be daring and press Y anyways. And it tells us that our cards are now 10, 10 plus 2. So we got an extra card, and that takes us our score to 22. That worked perfectly. So now let's go back and tackle the next part. Hint number 12 says once the user is done, it's time to let the computer play. The computer should keep drawing cards as long as it has a score less than 17. So the while loop is responsible for dealing with when the user wants to keep drawing cards. But once that's done, then we can tackle hint number 12, which is how does the computer actually play? What is its strategy? Well, we know that the computer has to keep drawing cards as long as it has a score of less than 17. But of course, 0, which represents a blackjack, is also less than 17, but we don't want it to draw a card if it has a blackjack. We can represent this logic using a while loop. While the computer score is not equal to 0 and the computer score is less than 17, then in this case, we want to keep drawing cards. We're going to take the computer's cards and we're going to use the append to add a card by dealing another card to the computer. And then we're going to recalculate the computer score so that it updates, and this while loop is evaluated on the latest score. So the computer score is going to equal calculate score using the computer's cards. And that means that the updated computer score is equal to the return value from calculate score. So that's hint 12 complete. In the next step, we're going to start comparing our player's hand with the dealer's hand. See you in the next lesson. At this point, we've created two while loops. The first while loop is for the user so that they can continue taking cards, and the second while loop is for the computer so that the dealer can follow their strategy. Now it's time to tackle hint 13, where we create a function called compare. We pass in the final user score and computer score, and then we compare the scores to see who has won, who has lost, or if they have a draw. So remember that in order to call a function, it has to be declared before the line we want to use it. So let's go back up, and after hint number 6, where we had the last function, let's add this hint here and create our compare function here. This compare function is going to take the user score and also the computer score, and it's going to compare these two scores. If the user score is equal to the computer score, then we said this should mean that it's a draw. So we'll return some sort of message that represents this. But elif, or else if, the computer has a blackjack, so the computer score is equal to 0, well, in this case, we should return that the user is lost and the opponent has a blackjack. And then we go through this list and we add in all of these other conditions. So I'm going to speed it up a bit. Now for the final condition, it says that the player with the highest score should win. So we can write an elif that compares the user score against the computer score. And we're basically saying if the user score is greater than the computer score, well, then that means that the user wins. But if that's not true, and because we've covered everything else, we now have the final return, which is you lose. Now, remember that if, elif, else statements are evaluated from top to bottom. Even though if the computer scores a 0, which is a blackjack, which is obviously much less than whatever score the user might have, because it's going to return at this point and it's going to exit the function, it will never get to this comparison if this is already true. If you get confused about how if, elif, and else works, especially the order in which you add the conditions, have a look back at the lesson where we talked about this in more detail. This might be a good time to revise that concept. But now that we've completed our compare function, we're going to use it at the end of our code here, because this is the time that the user is done drawing cards, the computer is done drawing cards, and now we can call that compare function and pass in the user score and also the computer score. So this should hopefully give us the final result as a piece of text. Let's run the code as it is and see what happens. We started out with a 3 and a 6, making a 9. Now we know the computer's at least got a 10, so let's add another card. So now we have a score of 11 with 3, 6, and 2, so we can still keep going. And luckily we've managed to get a total of 21. Now we're pretty much invincible, I think. So if I go ahead and hit no, because I don't want to take any more cards, then let's see what the result is. So it tells us we win, and a big smiley face. So we could probably give the user a little bit more information, like revealing the final deck, what the computer got and what we got. I'm going to go ahead and create some other print statements above this one. Maybe I'll tell the user that your final hand is this, and the final score was... And then let's reveal to them the computer's score. And then finally, we can print the user score and the computer score to tell them who won, who lost, or whether if it's a draw. In this deck, we've got 14, so let's add another card to it. Unfortunately, we went over because we got another 10. So our final hand is 10 for 10, and the final score was 24. The computer's final hand was 21, lucky them. So we went over and we lost. If we wanted to play another game, because we are blackjack addicts, then we want to give the user some sort of means of doing this, right? And that's what the last hint addresses. So we're going to ask the user if they want to restart the game. If the answer is yes, then we're going to clear the console and start a new game of blackjack, and also show the logo from art.py while we're at it. Let's go ahead and add a input, and we can ask them, do you want to play a game of blackjack? Type yes or no. So remember that this entire function is going to be evaluated, and the result or the output is going to replace this part of the code. So we can say that while the input is equal to y, then we're going to keep playing the game. The game is all the code between hint 5 and the end where we compare. So if we actually put this inside a function by indenting it over and then creating a function here called play game, well then we can actually call this function play game every time the user types y. Now, we don't want to clutter up our screen with all the previous games, so before we call play game, we also want to clear the console. And to do that, we obviously have to import the clear function from the Replit module. So from Replit, import clear, and now we can call this clear function to clear the console in here after each game, and then we can call play game so that the code in this function gets repeated. And we also said that at the beginning, when we play game, we're going to show the user the logo from art.py. So let's go back and import that as well. So from art, import logo. And then at the beginning of every game, we're going to print our logo. That's all there is to this project. And now let's run it one final time and see the whole thing in action. Do you want to play a game of blackjack? Yes. And it reveals our beautiful blackjack logo. It tells us the cards that we have. So current score of 11. I'm going to take another card. I'm on 21, which is perfect. So I'm going to pass now. And it tells me that my final hand was 21. The computer's final hand was 17. And I win. And now I can play another game just by typing Y again. And I can keep going on and on playing my game of blackjack. So I hope you had fun building this game with me. I know this was a really difficult project, and I know that some of you would have probably had some issues, but I really hope that you persevered and you got through it in the end. And through the process, you've managed to apply a lot of the things that we've learned in the last 10 days. This is a good time to review the concepts you've learned and have a think about what you might need to revise or revisit so that you're really, really strong on all the concepts and you're comfortable to continue on to the next 10 days. Now, if you want to take a look at the final code that I've got here, then just head over to Replit/Appery/blackjackfinal and you'll see all the code that I went through with you just now. Hey, well done for completing your very first capstone project. Now, I know it was a difficult project, but it's meant to stretch you just enough so that you're still struggling, but you still have all the components that you need to tackle it. Now, in this project, we saw a lot of the things that we learned in the previous days being put into use, like while loops, for loops, functions, variables, everything all packaged together. Now, these are the fundamentals that you're learning in each of the days and each of the lessons. even though individually they seem very small, but when put together, you can create really interesting and really complex projects like the Blackjack project. So even though it was difficult and even though you had to stretch yourself, as long as you've got solid foundations, then you can continue and you'll be able to build even better things. So together, we're going to make sure that you have a really solid foundation before you continue, before we start building more fun projects like websites and data mining and data scraping and data visualization and all of that. So make sure that you review all the concepts that you've learned so far. And if there's anything that's not quite 100%, then just review the content, practice it a few times, and then continue, and you'll be so much better off for that solid foundation. So have a good rest, and I'll see you tomorrow.